All right. Well, thank you so much. It's really nice to finally meet you, Daniel Seidemann.
Mm.
I have been following your posts on the platform formerly known as Twitter. I guess one day we're going to say Twitter, and people are going to be like, if they're listening this years later, be like, "What was Twitter?" Nobody, but
It's, it'll be like dialing a call or something like that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly. But and there's a million things I'd want to speak with you about,
Mhm.
but I feel like the pressing issue right now is Ramadan because it's upon us in a couple of
Mhm.
days, and so I wanted to ask you, you've been commenting about this a lot, and since October 7th, there's been some sort of relative quiet among Israeli Arabs and even Palestinians, except for there's been a little uptick in terror attacks recently. But you've written that this is a deceptive calm that we're
Mhm.
seeing. And first of all, I want to know, what do you mean by that?
Okay. First of all, there's a distinction between the Palestinian citizens of Israel and the Palestinians in the West Bank. And I am not enormously familiar with the nitty-gritty of the Palestinians of the West Bank. In East Jerusalem, one could have expected, based on a past experience, that there would be open clashes between the population and Israeli authorities, large protests, extreme sermons by imams on the mount, etc. And none of that has materialized. Now, there is a deep affinity between East Jerusalem, East Jerusalemites, and Gaza. They're certainly deeply affected by it. And virtually everybody that I know is kind of surprised why it hasn't, this has not erupted into violence. And I'm not sure that we know the complete answer. But the main question is it really thinkable that there will be a Ramadan against the backdrop of major bloodshed in Gaza and everything will go smoothly? That is the question, because the anticipation is it would not. Now, there are a number of reasons. I don't think that these are exhaustive. Um, Alexa's been quiet. And it's been quiet for a number of reasons. Number one, that the Palestinian population in East Jerusalem is subdued, pensive, seething. There's a lot of rage under the surface. There's a general sense, I believe, this is not the time for the third intifada, but there is a lot of pent-up rage. And there are all sorts of expressions of it. However, on the Mount Al-Aqsa, the numbers have been down of worshipers. Uh, by the way, the number of Jewish visitors have also been down, kind of surprisingly. Now, the reasons that the numbers are smaller are few. Number one, Al-Aqsa is inaccessible to the West Bankers, to the Jerusalem.
Mhm.
Palestinians in East Jerusalem are allowed access only above the age of 45. Now, it's not always enforced, but it's usually enforced. And there have been clashes, but the clashes have been a few streets away from the old city because the police won't allow access to younger people. And finally, the Palestinian citizens of Israel have not been coming. On normal Fridays, they will arrive in tens of thousands, and you'll see, 2 kilometers of buses on the Jericho Road from the Galilee, from the Negev, and they're not coming. So the crowds have been low. You haven't seen, large numbers of Hamas flags. The sermons have been, I would say, harsh, but not over and not overblown. Um, and the police are enforcing something akin to martial law on the streets of East Jerusalem, they're on their best behavior at the gates of Al-Aqsa,
The
which is an
people or the
indicate
police?
the police.
Okay.
The police are less aggressive. They are much more aggressive towards the Jewish visitors. They will not tolerate any kind of misbehavior. I've seen no reports of clashes, and I've been getting on occasion play-by-play like a basketball game. There are now 30 people going in here. The police are doing this. This is what the imam is saying, and things of that nature. And that's an indication that Netanyahu took the Temple Mount away from Ben-Gvir and left it in the hands of the Prime Minister's office. There's no other explanation.
Wow. Okay, that's so interesting.
Now, all of that's well and good. Under normal circumstances, it can't last. The prospect of that continuing under Ramadan is nil, because there are Ramadan rules. And going to Al-Aqsa is part of that. It's a linchpin of the entire event of the month of Ramadan, climaxing in Laylat al-Qadr. And being denied access during Ramadan is huge. Being denied access at a time when there's massive bloodshed in Gaza is even huger. And having Ben-Gvir stick it to you in order to achieve that is the perfect storm. So from the very beginning, literally from when the war broke out, at the highest levels in Washington, in European capitals, and in the Israeli government, there was a sentence: we don't want to have Ramadan against the backdrop of carnage in Gaza, which is one of the reasons you're seeing the urgency of Biden's push to get a ceasefire in Gaza, because it's also said, I believe this to be correct now, that there's nothing more than Iran, Hezbollah, and some of Hamas would like to use Ramadan at Al-Aqsa to trigger a regional war. And that is something that is feared. Now, another problem with this is, under normal circumstances, you and I wouldn't be hearing about the discussions. I would maybe, if I would scratch at my sources, but I'm not exactly flavor of the month for the Netanyahu government, so my sources aren't great. But the discussions would take place out of the public eye. I was asked, what were the policies in previous years about age limitations? And I had to scratch my head. Because there were no age limitations as such. There were decisions made on an ad hoc operational basis. Things are too tense. We're going to limit access to people above the age of 30. It's just too tense. And it was not great, but it was an ad hoc operational decision made on facts and realities on the ground. You had 2 weeks ago a meeting of the security forces. Immediately afterwards, there was a leak, obviously coming from Ben-Gvir, that there are going to be age limitations, that he wants to shut it down for Palestinian citizens of Israel, no access to West Bankers, and something like age limitations in the West Bank, East Jerusalem. Nothing like that has ever been done, and it was certainly not done in a triumphalist way. And that the goal of this was triumphalism.
where does it stand now? Is that what's going through?
No. Immediately, and it was leaked that it's not conclusive but that Netanyahu tends to side with Ben-Gvir. This created quite a stir in all sorts of places, especially, but not exclusively, among the Palestinian citizens of Israel, because it's been nonviolent society. It has displayed solidarity. It's clear that Palestinian citizens of Israel see October something as something that happened to us. And this is the reward. I mean, this has never been done before. It was literally an act of humiliation. Rather immediately, the police backed Ben-Gvir, but that's not surprising. But openly, the IDF, the Minister of Defense, Gallant, and the Shabak all said no. And Gallant even did so publicly, saying there is nothing that the Iranian axis would like more than there to be violence at Al-Aqsa. The way of making sure that that doesn't happen is maximal access, and people should keep their mouths shut, which was a not so subtle hint. In the couple of weeks that followed, Netanyahu held his silence, which in and of itself is outrageous. Until 2017, Netanyahu deserved fairly reasonable grades on the way that he would handle Al-Aqsa yearly. He became increasingly dismissive of Jordanian concerns as time went on. But since 2017, it's not the same person. In the past, he was extremely risk averse, and today he's completely unexpected. However, the pressure was such, and it's been wall-to-wall international pressure. You can't do this. And that was something that was done quietly, that the night before last, the decision fell, and he went on camera even and said, we will guarantee freedom of worship and ritual on the holiday of Ramadan, to which Suleiman Massoud, the brilliant Palestinian-Israeli journalist, said, Mr. Prime Minister, Ramadan is not a holiday, which was a delightful way of sticking it to him. Now, Ben-Gvir is continuing to rant. I don't think he will have control over the area around the mount, but he'll be in charge of East Jerusalem. Now, is Ben-Gvir going to use this as a pretext to bring down the coalition? This will not bring down the coalition. If Ben-Gvir decides he wants to bring down the coalition, this will be the pretext, or will be a possible pretext. Now, having said all that, things are better than we could have expected just a few days ago, but you could also have a situation where everybody does everything right, and there still will be an explosion, and it's quite possible that a regional war will blow up over something that didn't happen, over a rumor, an unbased rumor. And with a lot of people, beating tribal drums, that's not impossible. And the major variable is, will there be an active war in Gaza during Ramadan? And the answer is, at the moment, it looks better than we thought, but the major thing of ending the war is still unresolved.
Right. And it doesn't look like anything's going to be resolved in a couple of days. But
let's put it this way, it doesn't look that way. And there are a lot of indications that it can't take place. On the other hand, if there were to be a ceasefire by Ramadan, things would also look the way they are now. It's part of the brinksmanship. I tend to
Mhm,
think that this is not brinksmanship, but the fact that we are where we are is not entirely conclusive. It's an indication, but
mhm.
we have to assume that we will be, at least in the first several days of Ramadan, we will be without a ceasefire.
In the past, Ramadan has been a time where everybody's expecting tension and expecting violence, and there has been violence that's broken out during the holiday, right before the holiday. Sometimes it's also in conjunction with Jerusalem Day, so
Mhm.
it's a little bit of an overlap. But with Hamas actually calling their operation Al-Aqsa Flood, do we expect that Hamas is going to use this as an opportunity that, assuming Palestinians from the West Bank are not going to be allowed in to get to the Temple Mount?
They
Are they
will
going
be.
to? They
If it's
will.
up to the army, they will be. The army has said, we will allow access, we will create a mechanism which will allow that to happen. The army and the Shabak are in favor of maximal access, including to people in the West Bank.
Of course, that
Um,
creates a danger with possible Hamas affiliates that will be.
the army says the danger of closing it off is greater than the danger of allowing secured access. It's all a wager here.
Mhm,
Now, Ramadan's reputation for being an incendiary event is rather new. And there is nothing in the nature of the month of Ramadan that is inherently violent, precisely the opposite.
mhm.
But yes, you're correct. It's the overlap. I mean, the last 2 years we had Ramadan, Passover, and Easter simultaneously. You know, the Lord's sense of
Yeah.
humor having playing games with us. So you had two
And
years in a row.
Passover, right?
Yeah,
I think it was
you
all
had
the
the
holidays.
trifecta. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it went relatively well the last 2 years. It was not the year before.
right.
Um, we are going to be, as we go through the calendar, we'll have Ramadan and Easter at the end,
Hmm.
Passover, Jerusalem Day, Tisha B'Av,
Yep.
and each one of these is sort of a pyromaniacs fest. Okay, they all come out of the woodwork. So this is the busy season on the issue of Al-Aqsa Temple Mountain.
So the issue of course, with access now with Ramadan and up till now, as far as I know, many Palestinians are still, if not all, able. They're not allowed in. I mean, I know of people whose permits haven't been issued. I don't know if that's overall, but many Israelis are still at a point where October 7th is very fresh in their minds, and they don't want Israel to maintain the status quo. When Hamas completely breached the status quo on October 7th and are saying this is part of their, I don't want to use the word, bargaining chip, but it's part of their chip to use to say,
I
get our
I
hostages
disagree.
out.
I disagree with your appraisal of Israeli society. Yes, there's a lust for revenge, and among some, a bloodlust. And there is very little sympathy of Israelis for Palestinians and Palestinian suffering. Israeli society is much more united than it was before the war. Having said all that, I think that we have more anger, contempt, and even hatred of the messianic Temple Mount settler types than we've had ever. You dragged us into this. our troops were watching over your crazy settlers instead of protecting the borders. It's not the families of the hostages who are blocking humanitarian aid. It is the messianic settler types. Don't drag us into this. So I don't believe that Israelis are concerned about the protection of religious rights of Muslim Palestinians under Ramadan, but most Israelis don't mess with this, and certainly would not support changing the status quo. There is a broad consensus in support of the status quo. In the past, those who opposed it were a lunatic fringe. Over the years, they became a fringe, and now they have gone mainstream in the ideological right. It's an indication that in Israel, the unthinkable has become thinkable and the thinkable became possible. The needle has moved, but a large majority of Israelis support maintaining the status quo and look at Ben-Gvir's antics with concern and revulsion.
Why is it important for Israel to maintain a status quo when Hamas has does not want to at all?
Well, first of all, do you want Hamas to dictate relations between Israelis and Palestinians? There's a distinction between the Palestinian people and the Palestinians, even though there's a major overlap.
But they're sort of
Israel
dictating now the circumstances on the ground.
And I believe that it was a major mistake by both Israel and the Palestinian Authority to cede the high ground to people. And we ceded the high ground by offering no alternative except the kinds of aberrations, abominations that they carried out. Having said that, it was long a consensus in Israel that the wisest decision made by Israel after 1967 was the status quo, made by Moshe Dayan in 1967, where the thinking was that Israel, the legitimacy of Israeli claims to Jerusalem depends on our being worthy trustees of the sacred sites of other people. That is where we derive our legitimacy from. And we have to treat those sites respectively and with a great deal of self-restraint. And we have to recognize the autonomy of religious authorities. That's not because we're nice, it's because we are acting in an informed self-interest. That has eroded over time. Now, the Temple Mount movement and their fellow travelers consider the decision by Dayan to create the status quo in 1967 as the biggest mistake made by Israel since 1948. And they think about it a lot. They thought a lot before this government. And there are many in this core of ideological right who see the raison d'etre of this right-wing Netanyahu government to amend the colossal mistake of 1967 and to do away with the status quo. And which means it's a centerpiece for the ideological right. There is a broad consensus of Israel and unanimity in the security community that that would be disastrous for Israel.
Okay, awesome. That's all the questions I have. I mean, I don't know if there's something that you got like has to be added before, because by the way, in 3 or 4 days when it starts, this whole conversation could be moot. We never know what's going to happen. It's unbelievable.
We'll know. We'll know because it will not go unnoticed.
You know what? Like the historical facts on the ground are not going to change, but the results of whether we're in World War III when this is published, we'll see. We'll look back and be like, "Wow, look at that." But anyway, this is great, and I what you're talking about also with the temple and now with the red heifers in town, that is one of my next topics because that is.
Okay, if you would like an American angle on this. nobody loves the Temple Mount movement more than the Pastor Hagees, Mike Huckabees, and Pence's.
I
I
know.
mean,
They
end of
help
days,
them.
evangelical Christians are in bed with the Temple Mount movement. Yeah, they are the international conspiracy of Messiah bringers, whatever.
They actually brought, it was an evangelical Christian who brought the red heifers to Israel. Actually found them
I know
and
there are
brought them.
all sorts of weird stories with them.
Yeah.
Some of these evangelical Christians make the Temple Mount movement look tame.
This is going to be an interesting one. All right. Well, thank you so much. It was great to
Okay,
talk to you. And
feel free to get in touch
how can people follow you?
on Twitter.
Okay,
I mean,
I'll
when I
link.
publish something longer, I give a link, but
Okay,
Twitter's the
cool.
best.
Yeah, and that's always on Twitter too.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
awesome. This is great. Thank
Okay.
you
Great.
so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Bye bye.
Okay. All right. Bye.